chasing her. She has no brain!
I want to start this by saying I have no connection to Scooby-Doo. Outside of watching the show a little bit when I was a kid, I remember when Scrappy-Doo was introduced, and I liked that series a lot better. I remember when they moved it over to Boomerang. It was removed from Cartoon Network, and good riddance, I thought. In my childhood opinion, it was a show that only had a few good bits an episode, mostly the chase scenes, and was more concerned about quantity over quality. I think I honestly found it too scary. The reveal that every bad guy was a man in a mask was a decent way to curb my fear, but what I really remember Scooby-Doo for is the 1998 film Zombie Island. In Zombie Island, all bets were off. There were gypsy witches, evil sea captains, and real zombies. I'm talking about honest, eat-your-brain zombies. I was terrified of zombies at the time. My cousin played way too much Resident Evil and Silent Hill in front of 5-year-old me. And then when Zombie Island came out a year later, it was just too much for my 6-year-old brain to handle. As an adult, this movie is a feast of animation and I love it, probably because the animation was handled by Mook Animation, an overseas animation studio famous for several fun animated works at the time. If you haven't seen it, and you're a fan of animation, it's a classic. All that to say, I have no cultural tie to Velma or its politics. I'm sure that HBO wanted to find an audience of people who could be interested purely for nostalgia and virtue signaling's sake, but I'm just not that guy. I am, however, aware that a lot of you probably detest the show, mostly for its strong cultural stances and style of humor. I can understand that, but I just want you to know, going in, that this, quote, kind of thing doesn't offend me. I'm perfectly fine with a show being culturally progressive as long as it can still be funny or gripping. But Velma can't even muster a chuckle out of me. I think it's best to start off by saying, if this show wasn't a Scooby-Doo property, no one would watch it. You could strip away the entire Scooby-Doo angle and this would just be titled Melanin Mysteries Cultural Enlightenment Edition. The show feels like someone wanted to make a show about a person of color solving mysteries, then, for some reason, probably producer influence, had to fit the Scooby-Doo mold around their vision. Velma Dinkley, our socially inept main character, is an Indian girl living in the small town America. A student of her school is killed via cartoon brain removal, and Velma is framed for the murder. The girl is in Velma's locker, Velma is already antisocial, and the police are extremely, cartoonishly inept. She's given 24 hours to prove her innocence, or she's under arrest? I'm sure I don't have to point out that this is a strange way to approach story writing. This hook doesn't make any sense. It only works in cartoon logic. Generally, you would have the character break out of jail and then be on the lam while trying to solve the mystery. But in this show, the detectives, Daphne's adopted lesbian mothers, openly admit that they're bad police officers and need Velma to do their job for them.
Look, we know you couldn't kill Brenda, sweetie.
But we also know we're not like the best detectives. So the only way we're gonna convince the sheriff you're innocent is if you help us find Brenda's actual murderer.
That's why they're letting her go. It's just a terribly written call to action. I hate this setup. It's not grounded, but to be totally fair, Velma rarely is, and as a comedy show, it doesn't need to be. But I would personally like some consistent rules to dictate the stakes. Horrible things will happen in the show and people will act like it's no big deal, but they also won't make a joke out of it. I can't tell what's a big deal and what isn't in this universe. Watch this scene where Fred cuts this guy's leg. Where's the joke? What's the punchline? Is it that Fred cut a guy's leg off? Is it that Fred was extremely physically adept and aggressive? I mean, at least it's animated well. The comedic timing in this show sucks. It's all over the place. I am convinced that the reason none of the jokes land is that the vocal director had never heard of a comedic pause. Jokes never go far enough or have any sense of pacing. I can think of several examples, but this is the one that stands out to me. Velma has a world-shattering hallucination, and the shock stops her heart. Her stepmother saves her life by smacking her chest really hard, a medical procedure that I'm certain includes several more life-saving steps. I was 100% expecting a mouth-to-mouth gag, but instead Velma is shocked awake and, as if she had drowned, begins coughing rapidly, spitting all over her stepmother's face. Then she does it some more. That's the joke. She does it too much and it's kind of gross. That's it? That's the joke? How about this? How about she spits up something that doesn't make any sense? How about she does it for an embarrassingly long amount of time and her stepmother's face keeps getting more and more wet? How about her stepmother instantly runs off screaming about acid burning her eyes? Something, come on, like anything. This is how the show writes jokes. Nothing goes far enough. I theorize a bunch of raunchy material must have been written, and then it was reined back in for fear of being too offensive. The phrase, "isn't it already funny enough?" or "do we really have to include that part?" were probably common phrases in The Office. It's a pretty big shame that the show refuses to be funny too, because I guarantee you that people aren't going to appreciate the animation quality as much as I am. When it wants to, Velma can have some really cool animation. These scenes were obviously hand animated and probably where most of the budget went. I'm not talking about Fred cutting the guy's leg off either. I mean, that was well animated, but there are some real powerhouse scenes in here. The show doesn't look bad by any means. The character designs are impressively distinct and inspired. To be frank, the show's art style as a whole is rather nice to look at. If this show achieves anything over its contemporaries, it will be entirely off the back-breaking labor of its artists. Backgrounds have a nice painted look and nice screen tone vignette effects. The environments are very realized, believable, and have a lot of attention to detail. Then, when the show wants to be scary, it turns into a meat canyon animation. Velma's penchant for hallucinations is her character trait that breathes life into this show. It's also the crux of the show's plot. When Velma's mother abandoned her family while Velma herself was still a child, Velma felt so guilty for her mother's abandonment that now whenever she tries to solve a mystery, she hallucinates horrifying imagery. These are some of the show's best moments. Environments become dream-like sequences where the animators were really given a lot of freedom. The artwork in these segments is impressive, and if I ever end up watching the show again in the future, it will probably be because a Velma hallucinates compilation to chill and relax to on YouTube catches my eye. Musically, I can't tell you a thing about the show. I can't remember a single song. Nothing sticks out. I found a playlist online that says several of the soundtrack songs are officially licensed music. If that's the case, I didn't notice it in the first few episodes. What I did hear kind of sounded like something trying to do a parody of the X-Files theme.
But I felt so guilty that it was my mystery solving that had caused her to go missing. I started having horrifying hallucinations.
This is all your fault, Velma.
I suppose you could just call it synthwave or something if you're a loser. Synthwave sucks. Vaporwave is the superior wave. Vaporwave for life, fight me. Sound-wise, I would say this show is inspired by something like Teen Titans, Daria, or Clone High. There are a lot of comedic sound cues, and the show likes to play sound effects to really push a punchline. Unfortunately, it rarely works. The voice actors all pull out a generally agreeable performance, too. Frank Welker, the voice of Fred, is back to voice Fred's father. But honestly, the biggest problem with the acting is the material that they were given. In a show where you have your voice actors sing the song Pony by Genuine in a sad cadence, you've got to understand that you're probably not going to get an honest, believable performance.
If you're horny, let's do it. Ride it, my pony.
But the chances that such problems were caused by producer meddling is pretty high. Velma feels like a show made by committee. It tries embarrassingly hard to be Daria, but falls flat on its face. It may have at one point been someone's vision and dream for an animated show, but that dignity was drained by corporate culture. What we have here is a husk of a show that rapidly fires jokes at you without any room to breathe, only being held up by its art style and budget. I foresee that Velma will be forgotten in a year. I'll watch it all the way through, but only because I'm honestly curious if it gets worse. It's not the worst thing I've ever seen, but it sure does have the potential to be something truly awful. I give Velma a 4 out of 10. Bad. I'm tempted to give it a 3, but in my honest opinion, I think that it hasn't reached those depths in the first 2 episodes I've seen. If the show plans to improve itself, they need to take a new approach to joke writing. I'm all for the idea of gang of out and proud hallucinating people of color solve mysteries, but in media, a hit is a hit, and this isn't a hit. As always, let me know what you want to see me cover next. Special thanks to our producers Anthony Wumbo, Zachary Coroner, Biffman, and John Foreman. Happy Martin Luther King Day.